Hey everybody, welcome to Board Online, Board Offline. Today we're teaching you how to play the Dark Player in Dungeon Universalis. Now, there is a Dark Player and there's an automated Dark Player. And you will have to excuse my children. They are playing outside and happen to be just outside of the window near where I'm filming. So if you do hear the happy screaming going on, please be assured it is happy screaming. They are chasing each other around playing WWE or something like that. I don't know. There is a Dark Player as well as an automated Dark Player, and the Dark Player is what we're covering today. This is where a person takes control of the forces of evil in the game and plays against the rest of the players who are the heroes. The automated Dark Player will be covered in another video. Now, as the Dark Player, one of the first things you will absolutely need to do is be familiar with the quest sheet for whichever quest you happen to be playing. There will be important information here, such as the factions you can use, such as with this quest here, the Mirror Room, you can use the Devastators, or with this quest, the Buried Kings, you can use the Creatures of the Night. And if you go up to these first two quests here, we've got, say, Rourke's Lair and Free the Merchants, and both of them use the Bandits. If you have the Bestiary cards, you can collect the group indicated, the group or groups indicated, so that you have these cards as a reference as you start picking which enemies will be in the scenario. Or rather, the quest sheet likely will have some specifications about what can and can't be in the scenario, so keep that in mind as well. If you don't have the Bestiary cards, then you, of course, do have the Bestiary book, and so if we were looking for bandits, we'd go to page 32. And here we would have this area here for our reference as well. If the scenario does not specify a quest leader, then you will choose one from those that are available. So it could be the bandit boss, and then based off of the symbols here, it could also be the outlaw sorcerer, and there's no other option for the leader. This symbol indicates a champion level creature. You may also see this symbol here indicating a leader. One key point for the Dark Player in a quest where the leader is not specified, the Dark Player is not required to reveal who the leader is going to be until they actually place them out on the board. If the quest is using the reserve point counter, place it out in the play area. The Dark Player will then use their Dark Player markers to indicate the number of value points of the heroes in play. So if it was 32, it would look like this. This will be the total number of points the Dark Player will have in their reserve initially. Essentially, this is the budget for the Dark Player for the game. The Dark Player can use these points on things such as creatures. You can see here, this bandit boss costs 5 base value. And it can also be used on things such as traps and other obstacles and powers. If any of the players have played this scenario before, then the Dark Player will increase the value here by 2 points per hero. The victory points for the leader will be subtracted from this amount. So 5 for the bandit boss brings it down to 31. Keep in mind, though, that optional upgrades for the leader do not need to be paid for up front. Those can be paid for when the leader is deployed. The Dark Player may choose a magic object or relic for their leader, and they will pay the value points and reserve points for that object. So 31, we go down to 29. Players will know that the Dark Player has purchased this object, but they won't know specifically what it is. Take the Dark Player deck and divide it into obstacle cards and power cards, as indicated by these icons. Take these and shuffle them together and deal 5 per hero. So let's say we have 2 heroes. We've got a deck of 10 cards consisting of some mixture of obstacle and power cards. This is placed to the left of the reserve point counter. The Dark Player then draws a single one of these cards as one of the first cards in their hand. In this case, we have a obstacle, which is a trap called Crossfire. He then takes the other Dark Player cards, which are encounter cards, shuffles them up, draws a special creature card to be the first encounter card in their hand and places 2 cards per hero as the encounter deck. This is placed on the right side of the reserve point counter. If the dark player finds himself facing off against a group of heroes that are equal to 125 value points or more, they will increase the challenge using this guide here for every 25 value points above 100. This can be found on page 46 of the rulebook. At the beginning of the dark player's turn, the dark player may draw a card from one of their decks to add to their hand. Keep in mind that the dark player's hand should be kept secret from the heroes at all times. So, the dark player may take one of these cards. This is another obstacle card called Riddle, and add it to their hand. However, if enemies have been spawned at the scenario's main room or section and heroes are engaged in combat with those enemies, the dark player cannot draw from either deck. The same is true if the heroes have accomplished their mission. On their turn, the dark player will decide whether or not to activate one or more cards from their hand. This is the cost in reserve points. You can see some cards will have a varying cost based off of specifics on the card. And so if the dark player were to play Crossfire, it would cost 3 points and bring them down to 26. If the dark player doesn't have the reserve points, they cannot play the card. Once the card has been resolved, it is removed from play and placed next to its deck in a discard pile. Each time the dark player activates one of their cards, this is considered a dark player action. This should not be confused with the moves and actions of the characters and creatures that the dark player handles. Once the heroes have accomplished their mission, the dark player can only activate the cards that are still in his hand, since they are no longer able to draw from the decks. The dark player has a hand limit at all times equal to the number of heroes that are not knocked out times 2. So if there are 4 conscious heroes, the dark player's hand limit is 8. It should be noted that the hand limit can never be above 10 and it can never be below 4. If my hand limit were 4 and I drew another card, and now obviously I have exceeded that limit, immediately prior to doing anything else, I must discard 1 card to get back to my hand limit. This even applies if a hero gets knocked out. So if there were 3 conscious heroes, I'm at my limit right now of 6. If one of those heroes gets knocked out, I'm going to immediately have to discard 2 to get down to my new hand limit of 4. There's also another number here in the bottom right corner of these cards. That number allows the dark player to discard a card in order to gain more reserve points. The dark player can do this at any point, and they, for instance, if they discarded this one, it would go to its discard pile, and 6 points would be added to the reserve points for the dark player. If a deck ever runs out, the dark player simply will not be able to draw from that deck anymore. You do not reshuffle the discard pile to create a new deck. It's also important that the discard piles are face up. This information is considered open information. So let's take a closer look at what players will find on these cards. Again, we have power cards, obstacle cards, and encounter cards. You have the card's name in the top middle right here. And as we mentioned, the card type in the top right corner. The activation cost in the top left corner. Any card effects will be found in the center of the card. And the reserve points in the bottom right corner, as we mentioned. Power cards allow the dark player to activate special skills for their creatures, such as fleeing in order to reappear somewhere else, using fortune points, or other effects. Obstacle cards have a few additional things on them. This buzzsaw-looking thing here indicates that this obstacle card is a trap. Many obstacle cards are not traps, and you can see there is no symbol indicating that here. This right here is the result required to detect the trap using a perception test. And over here is the result required to deactivate it, if that's even possible. If there's a dash for this value, then it's not possible to deactivate it. These icons indicate where this trap can be played. We have a room, a corridor, a door, or a treasure chest. As you can see, some traps cannot be played in all areas. Obstacle cards allow the dark player to block the way or cause direct damage to the characters. If an obstacle is not a trap, such as complete darkness, it must be placed as soon as the heroes discover a new section. Traps, on the other hand, can only be placed in very specific situations. The first possibility is when a character of the group of heroes tries to perform a reveal a new section action, an open an unexplored door action, an open a chest action, or a search furniture action. In any of those instances, a trap can be played, assuming that it affects the appropriate element of the game. The second instance of when a trap can be played is if a hero steps on a square on the exact location indicated by the quest sheet. And finally, the third possibility is when a character steps on the first square outside of a safety zone. So what exactly is a safety zone? Well, characters create their own safety zones when they start their activation and can advance 2 squares within them. So when this character activates, they can move to here, and then the next step would be outside their safety zone. So essentially, a safety zone for an individual character is anywhere within 2 squares of where they're standing. Additionally, an allied character creates a safety zone 2 squares around it, whether or not they have already activated. So, for this character activating, it would mean that all the way down here would still be a safety zone as long as they moved within this character's 2-space radius. But if they moved this way, then the next space here would no longer be in the safety zone and would be a valid place for a trap. Now, there are a few other restrictions for playing traps. If this room had any dark player creatures, then a trap could not be activated. Unless, of course, it is a trap in a predefined location on the quest sheet, or is due to the hero trying to explore a new section or open a previously unopened door. Also, more than one obstacle cannot be activated for the same door, chest, or square. So, if a hero tries to open a chest and the dark player plays Riddle on that chest, once the hero has resolved Riddle, the dark player would not then be able to also play Complete Darkness. Additionally, obstacles may not be activated in a square or space adjacent to another obstacle. If a trap affects one exploration arrow, it actually will affect both of them, assuming that they both lead to the same section. This also means that once the trap is disarmed in a single section, or a single space rather, with an exploration arrow, that it will be disarmed in both. As soon as a trap is activated, the hero who has triggered the activation must pass a perception test. The result of this test must be equivalent to or exceed this value on the card. On a success, the trap is detected and will remain dormant in the door, chest, or square. However, to remember that it's there, leave the dark player card near the trap. The action the hero is intending to take is not taken. This allows them to instead disarm the trap that same turn if they wish. If this is a trap that was activated by stepping on a particular square, after detecting the trap, the hero will take 1 step back. This must be to the square they previously stepped out of. The character will not be able to move for the rest of their activation. Once a trap is discovered, any hero, not just the one who discovered it, can try to disarm it. If, when the trap was discovered, the hero receives double 6s, then the heroes will receive a +1 bonus when trying to deactivate it. When taking that perception test, if when taking that perception test, the hero had failed the perception test, then the trap will be triggered and its effects applied as indicated on the card. And as you might expect, the action the hero intended to perform will not be carried out, and the hero's activation is over. Anytime a hero tries to open or hit a chest or door where a trap has already been detected, the trap will automatically spring at that point, and its effects will be applied. The same is true if a hero steps in a square where we already know there's a dormant trap. It could happen that a trap is spun in such a way that it is technically cut off the next section. For instance, if this were a pit, maybe. When that occurs, the hero is allowed to jump into the next section. It could be that the quest sheet is going to require a certain obstacle to show up multiple times during a quest. If that's the case, the dark player will keep the indicated card face down in their area. And then when the activation is required based off the quest sheet, the dark player will spend the necessary reserve points and activate that obstacle in the appropriate spot. This card does not count against the limit the dark player can hold in their hand. And as you might expect, if the dark player doesn't have the reserve points, they cannot activate it. Encounter cards allow the dark player to spawn characters and creatures into the scenario after paying for their cost, of course. Creatures and characters can only ever be placed in squares that do not have other characters or obstacles. If for any reason the dark player can't find a valid space, then they cannot play the spawned character or creature. Anytime an encounter card is used, no more than half of the creatures may have ranged weapons or long-range weapons. This excludes throwing weapons, however. No encounter card can be activated in the section where the heroes begin their quests. No creature or character can be spawned 2 or fewer squares from any character in the hero group. No more than half the initial budget of reserve points can be spent on a single creature. So if the original budget was 42, then the maximum the dark player could spend on a single creature in this quest is 21. No more than 2 encounter cards can be activated in this same section. During the dark player's turn, they can activate all the creatures they placed on the board during this particular turn. They are activated in the same way the heroes are activated, except that they cannot perform exploratory actions. It should be noted that creatures are classified into grunt. These levels indicate how powerful that creature may be. As a general rule, a quest must have more grunt level characters than characters of the other levels combined. So if you have 2 champions and 4 elites, then you need to have at least 7 or more grunt level creatures. To more easily distinguish which are which, be sure to use the correct color base for each creature. If the chosen leader is knocked out, all grunt level characters that are 6 squares or fewer away from the leader must immediately pass a courage test or be removed from the game. And that's everything you need to know to play the dark player in Dungeon Universalis. Now, a couple of extra things real quick. I do want to point out that on page 50 to 52, there is a 6-turn example of what it will look like to have a dark player playing against the heroes. This could be a very useful thing to read through just to get a feel for the flow of the game. Additionally, there is this dark player shield. I believe this came with every copy of the game. I'm not sure if this might have been a Kickstarter thing, but inside there are all sorts of excellent rules references to assist the dark player. Got death of a leader over here. We've got card icons, rundown of magic, damage and conditions. I mean, we've got tons of great stuff in here. Ranged attacks, melee, line of sight and cover, a whole section on combat, and the use of shields down here. Moving on over here, you've got all the actions that are outlined, talking about experience points, turn, movement, and terrain. This really can be a great reference tool to the point where, honestly, I might make a copy of this on paper to hand out to the players themselves as a rules reference also. So thank you so much for watching this video. Be sure to come back and check out our next part where we will be covering the automated dark player. You know, what's funny is I keep calling it the automated dark player. Officially, it's called the artificial dark player. But that's what we'll be covering next. And that will, as you might expect, be a little bit more involved of a video since so many of the rules have to be handled by an AI. In the rules, for instance, the artificial dark player is about 11 pages of rules, whereas the dark player was only about 4 pages of rules. So it will be a little bit more of an involved video. Very excited to get into that. Also, be sure to come back and check out how to play the Gambler's Chess expansion. We have another video of that coming up very soon. We have the 3rd and final video in how to play SAS Rogue Regiment. And then the next game that we'll be getting into will be Creel Manor. Very excited for that as well. That's from the same designer as the Shadows of Kilforth, Gloom of Kilforth, Call of Kilforth, that whole series. So very excited to jump into that. And until next time, if you're bored online, bored offline.